To have Andy Guy. He has been researching the paranormal now for 35 years and actively conducting field observations since 2011 with a team called Southern Ghost Society. Using results from data logging, the environment, and investigation variables, Andy now designs and produces his own equipment through the trading name Sire, with a goal to sharing his findings with as many of the paranormal community as possible to help develop further insights and discoveries. So tonight we're very, very welcoming to Andy Guy. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to firstly thank you, Caroline, for inviting me to talk with you all today, and also to introducing me to the wealth of knowledge that's housed within ASSAP. I've been working through the back catalogue on YouTube, and it's going to keep me busy for some time to come. So thank you very much for that. So before I dive into the exciting world of data logging, I thought I'd give you a quick bit of background beyond me, above what we just covered there from Caroline. So I started as an electrical repair technician working for Dell, and that was back when you did actually repair things and you didn't just throw them away and replace them. Then moved through the finance, energy, and defense sectors in various operations, projects, and technical consultant roles. And whatever I learned throughout that progression, I always tried to think of an angle that I could use it in my paranormal research as an employed skill. I've worked with a lot of different investigation groups and individuals and to support their own endeavors, and hope to share what I've been up to for the last 16 active years with all you tonight. So if there's anything that you think that I could help you with out in your own work, then let me know, and what I can do possibly to muck in, always happy to help. Okay, now to really share the breadth of what I need to cover tonight, I need to work through my journey and thought process. So please bear with me and don't worry. There's plenty of juicy graphs later on to dig your teeth into. So that 35 years is a long time. And the reason being is because I've always had an interest in the paranormal since I was a kid. I never saw anything. There wasn't any experiences that I could say that was the moment I got an interest. It was just something there was a mystery to it. It was something bigger than myself, bigger than everyone else. And no one had really kind of figured out any of these things. So I read books about ghosts and cryptids. I don't think they were called cryptids at the time, just kind of like monsters and UFOs. And some of the UFO stories back then seem to be still going on right now. Weirdly, I've looked at some of his books recently, and the egg crafts are right in there as well. It's fascinating. In fact, I used to go to the library in my school so much to check these out that I had an English teacher once look at my record of books and start walking to class and trying to give me romance novels to read instead of reading these things which he called macabre. But for me, it was fascinating. There was so much mystery to it, so much that could be done to it that I don't know. I didn't ever think that the people who wrote the books, and even my favorite author, Peter Underwood, I'm not entirely sure he really kind of got to the point where it was progressed to something he felt like he'd got from it. So years later, I hadn't really done much about it. I still hadn't seen anything or heard anything. So I got a present from my girlfriend to go and investigate at Woodchester Mansion in Gloucester, which is a fascinating building. A lot of history of the location, not so much the building because it was never finished and only lived in for a brief time in one of the rooms. But it still looked good, and it still looked like exactly the sort of place I'd want to investigate. And my thought process was, I want to find out if there's something to this. Is there something to the paranormal in the real world? Can I see this? So we've been watching a lot of the American shows at the time. This was 2011. Things like Ghost Hunters and Ghost Hunters International. So before we went to the location, I bought a whole bunch of stuff. So night vision camera, audio recorders, a mel meter, a temperature gun. I went fully kitted out because I thought if something's worth doing, it's worth spending hundreds of pounds on before you decide if you want to do it or not. And it was an interesting building, but it was a difficult investigation. There was a lot of one-upmanships and theatre. So if someone said that they felt there was someone there, then someone else would say, I can see them. And the next person would say, I can see them and they're running out the window and they've jumped out. And then someone would say, oh, I can see someone else and they're chasing that person out the window. And I was thinking, where? I've got this camera. I spent all this money on this camera. I can't see any of this stuff. What's going on? So it got to one point in the night where everyone split off. That everyone just went their own way and they were running and screaming. And I thought, I'm close to my end of my tether with this. So I don't feel like I bought this stuff and came all this way for no reason at all. So we tried to find a little quiet corner somewhere just so we could just do our own little investigation. And as I was walking near where the front door is, well, it's technically the back door, but the door everyone comes in from the car park. I saw a room to my left. I thought, I've not been in there. That might be a good place to go in. So I turned to face it, and there was just bars and junk and stuff in front of that room. I thought, oh, there's not actually a room there. But I got the weirdest feeling that someone was watching me. So I said, who are you? Why are you watching me? And through the earphones that are plugged into the night vision camera, this is the footage, by the way, which I shot with that really potato camera back then. I heard very clearly, Arthur. And that really kind of caught me dead. It was a strange experience, and it was a strange link as well, because that was my father's name. But I didn't think of that at the time, strangely enough. It was just, I didn't expect to get that. But I was so pumped up about that. I thought that was great. And then we packed up and left because we'd had enough. Looking back on that investigation, maybe the next 2 or 3 times we went, we eventually found some research which said there was actually the son of one of the owners. His name was Arthur, and he died at a very early age. And the recording to this day, you can hear the name, and it doesn't sound like a baby. It sounds almost like an older man lamenting this son, which is kind of sad. I've not managed to catch that since going back there. I've been there loads of times. It's one of my favorite locations. Probably for that reason. So I'd kind of caught the bug then. I thought, I do want to look into this. I think there's something to this. I don't know what that experience was. I want to build on it. So I started looking for a new group, and we found one that was local, which is Southern Ghost Society. It was set up and run by a father and 2 sons, Gary, Dan, and Lee Marchant. And we went along to Bursland Brickworks, which is just outside Portsmouth. And at the time, it was quite a quiet location. There's seems to be some sort of residual activity there, but generally we weren't getting much communication. But beyond that, the team was very respectful, good at controlling the location, and supported individuals' own goals and researches, and let people kind of do their own thing, but in a way which meant that everyone wasn't running around and screaming. And the first thing that Gary said to my partner and I was, you guys look like you know what you're doing. Do you want to just kind of go off and find your own room? And I thought, that's fantastic. I'm going to do that now. And after that, I started going at least once a month to different locations all over the place. And as time progressed, managed to pick up lots of different things, lots of little different bits of evidence all over the place that were kind of different degrees of, interesting. Some were unexplainable. Some were maybe there's something we can come back and do later. But it just kind of building up. And it got to the point where I was thinking, okay, so what do I do with all this stuff now? I've got these interesting videos. I go into work on the Monday and show them to people, and they go, oh, that's exciting. And, oh, I don't want to go out to those sort of places. How do you do it? And so I think, okay, I feel like there is something to this. I've ticked that off now. I feel like there's something to it. How do I progress? Why am I doing this? do I feel like I need to prove this is here? And how would you go about doing it? And I found out that other people do that to this day as well. When I speak to people about this, they also say, I've got all these great things I can show you them, and they're not really doing much with them because how do you how do you progress any of this? And the answer came to me when we were in Markham Castle in 2013. And at that time, these are photos of the time, they were actually filming a show called Da Vinci's Demons. So they decked out the entire building in Renaissance Italy furniture and paintings and murals, and it was kind of strange because it's a castle in near Newport in South Wales, which doesn't normally look like that. And I've not actually been back there since. Strangely, we're going again this year, so I'm interested to see what it's like without all the set dressing. But it was also 2013, and it was August, and it was warm and sunny, and we were sitting in this one of these bedrooms with the four poster beds and pictures of saints on the wall. And one of our team members, who was half falling asleep, said, I'm not sure where we start this time of day. There's nothing really happens until the sun goes down. And something that triggered a thought that maybe there's some sort of combination here. Is that true? Are you more likely to get something happen when it's light or dark or August or September, or what are the variables and why are those variables? Because understanding some sort of pattern to these occurrences, maybe that will tell you a little bit of something about it. And if you know a bit something about it, maybe you can do something to get the right conditions or hit the right times to go to these places to then have the best chance of getting experiences and communications. And that made me think, how do you do that? How do you then pull all that together? That's a lot of writing things down. And that's exactly what I started doing. I bought a little mini clipboard and then got a retractable key fob, attached that clipboard to it, covered it in bits of paper, got a pencil, also attached that to a pulley out cord, attached that to my trousers, and then just bumbled round forts, this banging around, trying to keep notes of everything that was going on. So because of reading Peter Underwood as a kid, my first thought was, right, okay, every 10 minutes I need to stop, record what the temperature is, or plot it on a little graph to show how it's changing. And that's good, but then you forget to investigate because you're so busy with all the admin of it. And at that time, there was some good progressions in kind of home processing and microcontrollers through Arduinos. And I thought, I reckon I can pick up writing code for the Arduinos and maybe automate some of this, so I don't have to wander around with this clipboard and spend all my time drawing graphs when I should be trying to observe the room and see what's going on. So that started the process of developing something which was practical and captured all this information and didn't get in the way of the investigation, and perhaps had outputs which might be useful to then help me with my piles of evidence. So whilst I was looking at how to work on these Arduinos, I thought, quick and easy one. You can get these data loggers, which are meant to go in the back of meat trucks and then record the temperature and the humidity throughout the journey, just to make sure the meat hasn't gone off. And they're quite good. They're quite cheap. You can buy quite a few of them. And when you plug them in, you even get graphs and things out of them. So they were great to start off with, just to get the concept going. It's like, is this going to work? And it meant that I didn't have to draw any more graphs, which was so fantastic. And something triggered the back of my mind. I thought, I think I've read something in one of my books about someone doing this. So I kind of scrambled through and I found the explanations of Tony Cornell, Alan Gould, and Howard Wilkinson, who built the spontaneous psychophysical incident data electronic recorder, SPIDER, which I think was one of those acronyms you work backwards, because it basically, they had a cardboard box painted black, full of recorders and temperature sensors and triggered IR cameras, and then lots of wires coming out of it. So it looked like a great big spider. And that was designed to cluster all these different devices in one place, and then they leave it there for a while. And then if they detect any changes, it would then trigger cameras or recorders to go off. And that created more controlled condition of what was going on. It would record the environment a lot better than doing these things individually. And they'd taken that thing all over the world, used it on dozens of investigations. But the thing is, when I was reading about it, I thought, this is not quite what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to use the data to capture footage. I'm more using the data to back the footage up that's caught, trying to see if there's any patterns, which means it's more likely or not for something to be captured. That being said, I like the spider name, so we ended up using that in our data loggers. But before we got to there, I'd kind of wanted to expand from that economy logger and put I wanted EMF on there because everyone wants to see EMF. And the way I did that was to get a mel meter and a REM pod and an Ovulus and these data loggers and screw them to a piece of MDF. Then attach a selfie stick and a car dash cam pointing downwards at this board. Then attach the board to a tripod and then wander around forts and castles with this dangerous contraption poking people's eyes out and other things that aren't eyes. And it was good for a very short period of time, but it also was massive and practical. And watching back footage in the dark of the recorders just to see if you can see what changes are on the EMF, etc. Terrible viewing. So the first actual real logger I built, we called the ugly box because it was just an outside junction box case and a basic 8-digit LED screen on the front. But the point is that it recorded temperature and humidity and air pressure, electric field, eventually magnetic field, but it also did some calculations. So I got the calculations for using some of those conditions to also then calculate if it was possible for fog to be present, and also the percentage of chance of dust being able to hang in the air and record that yes or no every second. So we could use that to help with proving or disproving orbs and fogs. But importantly, also built in the functionality to tag events. So using a remote control, little RF one, it meant that we could then click that and it would put a data point in the data at that point to then say something has happened. So I can then jump back to that point and review and say what were the conditions at that point, tying what the environment was when that event happened. And if that event turned out that we did have good evidence of it and we couldn't disprove it and there was nothing we could do in future to disprove it, that was a solid data point. I know those conditions. And given enough time and enough A-class events, we could then start drawing some sort of conclusions about if there was any link between environmental conditions and the chances of getting different categories of events. Because the other factor was we need to split these things up. We need to break apart something happening or a voice happening and then work out if it was recorded on a recorder or it was just in the air. And if something was visual, if it was a full body, it was a partial. So I wanted to categorize every particular type of event and then link that to these different conditions. We used that for quite a while, and it was a prototype for a few years until I wanted to try and then broaden this out. So move from one data logger that was just with me to have something which was more portable. So I wasn't carrying around, at that time I had lots of cameras and recorders and microphones and this. So 6 tripods around buildings is horrendous. But also then I wanted the other people in the building. So our group typically would split up a location and just break into teams. And then I wanted them to have recorders. But also wanted to put a recorder outside the building so I can then compare that against the data that was inside the room with us. So that's when I built a backpack, which you can see there, which instantly, as soon as I put this backpack on, people whistle the Ghostbusters tune, which is always appreciated. But the backpack works as the data logger. The sensors are actually mounted at the back, so it's away from my body, but also has a night vision camera and IR built into it, and two dual dynamic microphones, which then point opposite directions, which then become the left and right channel of the audio recorder that's in there as well. And the controls are buttons up here, so I can then discreetly click something, say what I've seen, and then just move on. So it means that you're not then stopping writing down anything. You can just report what you've said. I can then go back when I'm looking, reviewing, see what I might have seen or heard, check against that without needing to stop the proceedings and break the flow of what's going on. The team spiders, as we now call them, I changed it, the spelling of it, so it's not going to disrespect Tony Cornell's, and also modernize it, because you can't have vowels these days in words. You've got to take the vowels out. Those do a similar sort of thing, but they're not wearable. They're still on tripods. There's one of the guys up here, actually. Let me just point them out. This is the guy here. And it's got a nice big display on it, and it's, when it detects sudden changes in certain conditions, it'll flip to a graph so that people can see what the change was over time, if it was a sudden one or not. If it was a gradual change, then you can probably ignore it. And they can then do the same thing. They could click a button, they then say what they've seen or heard, and then just move on again. The other clicks which you can do is equipment syncing. So you press a button and then that will sync up your equipment. I'll cover that in a bit. And also starting and ending sessions. So when someone puts it down, they click a button, and then that means they've started investigating that area, and then they click a button when they finish. And then that data is then stored, the start and end times of that particular session. Okay, so I had some data logging. The prototypes of those were going well. And next step was to try and control things a little bit better, because the Sun Ghost Society does both public and private events. So sometimes if we can with locations, we just go with a core team. If it's a bigger location, we go with the core team, but then also invite other, quite often regular members of the public, to be able to spread the cost of the building, because it's a non-profit organization. So we literally just take the cost of booking a place and then split it amongst whoever's going. So we all pay the same. But the problem with that is, if you've rented a castle and you've got 25 people along with you, that's a lot of noise. And positioning what's going on and where, when you're trying to review, is a little bit difficult. So if someone says, click, I've heard from some footsteps, how do I know that's not just another team wandering around? The solution I took to that was to put audio recorders, at least audio recorders, everywhere. Yeah, nearly everywhere. There's certain places you're not meant to put them, so we very often don't. As you can see from here, what we tend to do is split a location up into a few areas, and then kind of put key places, doorways, staircases, anywhere there's going to be a lot of traversal, but also inside the rooms. In the bottom right one there, that's the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Center. Some of those rooms are quite small, but by putting a recorder in each corner of the room, we can then do some positional work when we actually pick up things like sounds. As well as that, each team member, if we do a public one, that's just then the team members become team leaders. They wear a wrist-mounted one. This little guy, this little fella here. And that basically just records the entire night. And it means that if they see anything or want to record something, they literally click and they can see it, and they don't have to do anything else. But also, we then have a good idea of where they are in the building and what the audio is with them. So if someone says, click, I've heard footsteps, I can then work out where those footsteps came from, if anyone. Right, so when we first started doing this, we had all this footage from around the building, and we had all this data. and I was using Excel at the time just to try and figure out things, but needed a bit of more repository. So I built a website, which I call the Paranormal Investigation Log, because it does what it says on the tin. And the idea of that is it's a lot of things. It develops a lot over time. So I'll cover the kind of key areas of what it does. But primarily, it's designed to be online, so it can be shared amongst the team, but also store the research for the location, everything about the investigations we go on, but most importantly, a place for us to upload the data from the data logger. So I'll have a data logger. Beth, my partner, will have one each team. So there'll be 3 more data loggers and then outside the building. So it's a lot of data, but it all goes into here. And then that data can then be cross-referenced against other investigations at the same place or globally against any investigation anywhere. So now when we tag I've heard footsteps, I can then, if I prove that there wasn't another team and I can't find an explanation for them, I've then got the conditions at that location, which I can compare to conditions at any other type of location where I've also had footsteps. And then maybe or maybe not draw some conclusions about the conditions surrounding those events. I like to, there are 2 camps when it comes to research. There are some people who don't want to know anything at all about a building before they go there, or even after they turn up. And there are people who like to know everything that's ever happened there. And I suppose there's a third camp where they just like a light touch. I'm in the I want to know everything that's ever happened there camp, but I also want to be able to pull the things which might be pertinent or useful per investigation from it. So when we start to look at a place which we might go to, first thing we do before we book the place is we do some research on it. We go into the history of what the stages of what has on that location over time, who was living there, but also pull lots of documentation which could be useful. So big on maps. I always start with a map, actually. So I'll start with a historical map. So I work backwards in time as far as I can go before the maps start to get a bit general. But also you can get maps of where mobile towers are in relation to the building, the topography of the area, anything related to the claims. And also I've been doing a study on lithography. So what's the makeup of the ground beneath the building? Because there's a common understanding that limestone based buildings or limestone bedded buildings are more likely to have events. And I thought that's another thing we can use for data loggers for. We can then work out if that's the case or not. Every location we go, we record what's this built on and then work out if there's anything to the building, then we can start to work that out. And I may have slides of that later. You never know. The other thing that I like to put on here is alternative names, because that's really useful when it comes to researching very old buildings. If you're searching through newspapers, you need to know what it was called 50, 100, 300 years ago. I then start to pull in all this information and build up a timeline of key events in the building. That kind of forms a bit of a backbone for the rest of the research. I then start pulling in stories and people who lived there or were involved with the buildings and the architecture. So what's been changed over time, because that's sometimes really important. How's the building changed? And then start to go into newspaper articles. What events have been so noteworthy someone's made a newspaper article about it, or even what help has someone requested. That can sometimes tell you a little bit of a story as well. If the building has a huge turnover of staff, why is that? I then look at paranormal claims. So I go to the bookcase and then rummage through the books about that particular place, and also online to find out if other people have investigated there. I pull in reports from other teams and dump it all in there. But what I've tried to do with the site here is to try to do as much work for you, so you're not doing as much admin. So all the things like the maps and orthography, etc., and even kind of a button which I can click and get direction to the place. I've just done as a kind of a quick link button so you can click it and it does it for you, and you can just then record stuff from that data. But that forms the basis really of when we're deciding to do a place or not, and then also what information do we want to take with us to try and build into our experiments, which are then recorded in the investigation section. So after we go back from a location, we take all the SD cards out and upload them to the website. And what that does is, because when we started each session, we clicked, and when we witnessed something, we clicked, and when we started some footage on different devices, we clicked. The site builds the structured investigation from that. So it breaks it down to the sessions, the areas, the teams who are working together, and that means we've got the structure to work through on the review. It literally gives you a feed. After you work through it, it will show you this was event 1. Here's what the time was. You then record on when someone's clicked it, you check their audio, and then they'll say, I saw this. So you can say, okay, then Tim saw this, and you can then allocate that event to Tim. That way, Tim down the line can then check the footage and say, that's what I heard, that's what I didn't hear, or more usefully, and they'll say, yes, and I got this other recording on my recorder, and then they can back up what I picked up on the review. And that is done via what we call the witness system. So after our initial review, where we go through all the events and record off the audio where the person was and who witnessed it, we check the footage and we say, yep, okay, I picked up those footsteps. Upload the footsteps audio onto the paranormal investigation log. And then when we finish that particular review of the entire location, click a button, and then Tim will receive an email, and it says, Tim, you were at this location at this particular time, and you witnessed these events. And then he can then scroll through those events that were linked to him, check what we put on there, and also upload both his own notes about that event, also their own footage. And then that all gets compiled into the final reporting. We also have a more general interface for additional info. So sometimes something isn't necessarily a paranormal event you can record, it's a piece of information. So if someone's on some dowsing rods and they've been bringing some good interaction and they've picked up a date or a name or address or anything at all, I'm very keen not to close the door on any sort of information. The more kind of data we can pull into these reports, the more chances we're going to see that there are links. So if someone picked up the name Elizabeth on an audio recorder in 2018, and then someone got the same thing at the same location in the same room on dowsing rods in 2021, and in 2025 someone had it whispered in their ear, because those are all different ways of getting that information, some of them are not recorded at all. I still wanted to capture these general unproven bits of data, because over time they might prove useful. So people were able to just dump in, for that investigation, I got this year, or I've got this name, or this piece of information, and that then also gets pulled into the report for the location, which is what we use when we are reporting back. If a particular location actually is interested in the way we approach things and they want to see an output from it, we can then give them the dump, saying, so this is about your location. We found out this in the history. You probably will know all this already. I'm telling you something you know, but it might be something to fill in the gaps between their own knowledge. But also, here's what happened on our investigation. Here's the footage links. You can check them out yourself. Here's the information that people got, but we can't necessarily back it up. And enjoy. And that's been quite useful for when people have been umming there about if they're going to keep doing it or not. It kind of revitalizes some stakeholders at locations, that they're not just hanging on until 3 a.m. for no reason. Sometimes at the beginning of the night, if I've been to a place before, I'll bring that along and give it to them so they can take a look over it while we're there as a little bit of reading material. But that's been quite good, and it gives a bit of value back and appreciation for the location. So I promised practical applications, and all I've been talking about is data loggers right now. So from what I explained about the physical, technical objects and then the software, there are some very useful things which are good outputs of these. Apart from the main purpose of the research, it's proved useful in things like footage synchronization. So as one of the clicks is what we call a P code. And the reason it's called a P code is on the original Ugly box. It was a 8-digit display. So I was limited to what characters I could put on the display. And I'd run out of other letters by that point. So when someone does a synchronization, I've used S for session, so can't use that. It records another line in the data. And click number 1 comes up with P1. And then all you need to do is say P1. And then when you go to, this is Vegas. When you go to Vegas, you dump in all the footage from all these different recorders around the building and the cameras. You can then on the timeline put what times those P codes were, and then start syncing your audio to when you then hear me saying P1. And if you start a bunch of recorders at the same time, so for example, all the ones that are wrist recorders, I'll start up. And then after the last one's going, I'll say click P3. I can then sync all of those in one go. So taking that approach of recording when I'm starting each particular piece of equipment on the data logger means syncing things up towards the review is a lot easier. And it also means that other people can then send me footage, and I then have a specific time of night. I can then, if I was around, give them their own P code, or at least on their audio, if I hear myself, I can then sync it up. I can use their footage easily as well. Because when you have 5-6 hours of recordings, it's very hard to find exactly where that 30-second clip of theirs came from sometimes. After we've done that sync, that is where we then can then do the review and work through all the different events and what time there were. I can jump onto the timeline. I can then check the team audio from where they clicked and then find out what it was. I can then also then jump to any other team, any other room. We have a data log or an audio recorder outside the building, so I can check outside for foxes and seagulls because they make horrendous noises which sound like screaming and murders. And I've got a lot of footage of foxes and seagulls because of that. And yeah, so then when once we finished compiling that, the review is done and that witness email goes out so people can add to it. The next output, another practical application, is planning. So if you know, either if you've been there before, what sort of events have occurred there, are they all visual, or are they auditory, or are they all someone's feelings? What location areas were they? What sort of times of the day were they? All this is real hard facts about what's happening and when could be a part of the planning for the investigation. So looking at these previous anomalous events to determine which techniques worked as well is good. So if you're getting lots of Estes hits in a particular building, then you might want to build that into the planning as well. If there are lots of claims of someone walking down the staircase, you know, I need to now plan in bringing a camera. If the previous investigations said, I put a camera up that staircase and I've never caught anything there, but when it was in the basement, here's the blob that I got on there, you then need to plan again for putting it in the basement. So using the outputs from the data logging, you can then say, what gives me the best chance of catching something this time? Where should I be and what should I use? It also means you can then plan teams based on what sort of experiments. So if you are looking at something like a dowsing rod experiment, you then know you want to kind of split out your dowsing rod people amongst the different groups in order to then they can then cover as much area as possible, for example. We had some good cross-team work on this as well. So our outputs of what to do next were then passed to other groups who then took that with them, then progressed some of that, and then passed back their findings, and then we then continued it, which is a very good way of working with other groups if you can give them specifics. If you generally say, check out the basement, not as good as saying at this time at this place, make sure we've got something set up in that direction. You're not guaranteed, of course, but it increases your chance, I think. One of the parts of the review is when we look at the events, we look at what are the next actions. So every time we have an event, like what could we do better, and then record our next action. So part of the planning also is to look through those lessons learned for each event to then go, oh, I need to put an audio recorder in the doorway at the front because people are going in and out quite a lot, and I want to make sure I cover that. Which leads nicely on to sharing things out. So it can be a lot of work, especially reviewing, and reviewing this much footage can be daunting. But we put everything on the cloud, on a server somewhere, probably in California or the moon, I don't know. But we dump literally all our footage on a mega sync, and that enables then other team members to go in there, and if they want, they can literally listen to entire sessions. People like doing that. I more focus on what's on the right-hand slide, which is working through when people clicked, because my kind of goal is, what are these conditions for these particular events? I'm trying to capture data points. I'm trying to capture good evidence at these points in time, and other people's goals are not the same. So this gives them the opportunity to look at the footage and review things in their way, but with the information of what are the key points during the night in order to focus on hitting those, and then also enable them to upload their own footage into the same cloud storage. And that then feeds back into my research. So working through the technology means that we can then work together before, during, and after the event, as well as then also pass back these footage to other people who might not normally investigate with us, might be some other team that we've kind of joined up for the night. We can then share things out between those teams. So it's another opportunity for collaboration. Here's an interesting one, which kind of came across as a kind of thought experiment, but actually turned out pretty useful. And that is helping the team develop. So when we look at events, we categorize them. And there's lots of different categorizations, approaches to different anomalous events. My approach is evidence-based. So a class A is something which we've evidenced, but we've got no current way of trying to debunk it. And to all intents and purposes, it seems like it's inexplicable. B is I've got good evidence of it, but either myself or someone during the review has said, hang on, could it be that there's a fridge on the floor above and that's clicked on at that point? We need to be able to go back and check it out later. So we put that down as a B. C is we've got a good bit of evidence, but hand on heart, that slight tapping noise, that click, I can't say that that's some sort of proof of life after death. So we put it as a lower class of data point. A D is we have evidence of it, but we've also managed to evidence our debunking of it. So we've been able to prove this was actually just another team walking around, or this was a piece of equipment just running out of batteries. So we debunk it. And X is someone recorded an event, but there wasn't any evidence. So we missed it. And by categorizing the events in that way, we can then give a weighting to the evidence in the data. So our data points are then really good or not so good. So we use them to work out, is there anything to these environmental conditions for this type of event? We can then say, let's focus on all just the really good ones, or let's just take a more general view and pull in some of the Bs, which we haven't yet finished, but we're kind of interested in the bigger picture. Now, that being said, you can tell then a lot from individuals about which grades they get, or at least indicators of things which we can possibly improve across the team. For example, so an investigator who isn't getting lots of debunks, if they've got a low amount of debunks, they might not be recording every event. They might be ignoring things and only then clicking with that 100% sure that something is paranormal. And based on data and experience, sometimes things might seem perfectly normal and turn out not to be at all. So that a low debunking number percentage might mean that someone needs to just not mind clicking. Just click if in doubt, click it out. Okay, so someone who's getting lots of X's, as in no evidence, might need to look at their recording techniques. Again, from experience, it probably means they're standing in front of the camera that they've set up, or chatting during an audio event, and it kind of just wipes it out, which is disappointing for people. But it's something that you can improve on just through communication amongst the team usually. I would say lots of A's, which is contentious, might mean we need to go back to them again and just make sure there isn't anything we can do in future. Should it really be a B, really? So it's more of a kind of just looking back at the evidence and just double checking it. And lots of C's might mean that there's not so much critical thinking, and they're just, and this might have happened. It might be that someone's just recording the same radiator knocking 30 times in one evening, which is good for the clicks, but also real pain on the review. And you might miss something just because you're getting bored of listening to a radiator clicking. But otherwise, it's very good for looking at what people are doing and trying to approach that in a way of just to improve the team in general. And lastly, which is the main output I was looking at, which was trying to spot patterns. So trying to identify what variables seem to be linked to anomalous events and which ones aren't, and which variables are in play with each other. Maybe you need to have 6 people in a room, it needs to be a full moon, and it needs to be raining outside. Maybe those are all in conjoined, they make this magic formula, and then it happens. But without looking for these patterns, we'll never be able to determine that and try out some of these theories of pattern recognition. There can be a combination of the location itself, where it's set. It could be that the bedrock and the time of day and the technique used is part of the combination, or it could just be simple as certain environmental conditions. And finally, what was tried. So when we look at different techniques and experiments that can be done, maybe that is part of it as well. Maybe certain locations lend well to Ouija boards, or lend well to just calling out with compassion, or anything really. So it's important to then look at what was tried and where by whom and what happened. Try and pick up some patterns. So based on all those different applications, I wanted to focus on some of the pattern-based ones because they're my favorite and the reason I'm doing it. And thought I'd share with you some of the patterns that I have picked up on so far. And bearing in mind, the more data we have and the better class of data, the more you can lay faith in some of these results. But take them as you will, as of this point in time. So the first one I looked at was, what sort of time do you get anomalous events, and does that change over time? And it's a solid downward slope in reality. You've been more likely to get a good evidenced event before midnight. And I think there's an energy factor at play here, which might be the energy you bring to that investigation, or it could be the energy of the investigators spotting things properly. But basically, after 12, it significantly drops off the chance of actually evidencing something. So I've been advocating a while that maybe we don't need to stay up so late. We just turn up and start at 8 on the dot, and then just kind of knock off a little bit later, because there's not much point hanging around to 3 a.m. if we're not managed to catch anything. Okay, this one's probably a little bit table-y, but I did promise to have some data. So this is about the locations. So I've delved a little bit into things about the locations which we can see as a pattern. One of these here is to do with the different bedrock composition. So I mentioned that before. And split across the different categories of anomalous events. So disembodied voices and footsteps and EMF spikes, unexplained movements. It seems that, and I've taken into account the amount of times we've been at a location in these factors. I've weighted this, so they should be even across the board. So I'm always up for anyone's suggestion on how to work the data to kind of make it as fair and valid as possible. Clay comes out a lot higher than limestone, which was weird. I wasn't expecting that, but at the end, it could just all be a water-based thing. It seems to be a bit of a common factor. There are lots of other different bedrocks that we've been investigating at, and they don't come anywhere near these guys. Also on here are the different types of building, so domestics and educational and hospitals, and then based on the claims, so the story about reckless Roddy who fell off his horse was a full-bodied apparition, or someone feeling uncomfortable in the basement was a feelings of unease. Categorize the different types of building about what sort of claims which were there. And the use of that is that you then, if you're going to that sort of building, know what sort of equipment and technique to focus on. If it's something there's a lot of audio there, then go heavy on the session recording. There's a lot of visual, then make sure everyone's carrying something to record. And I also looked in this, I've done lots of these, but the different lithology of the location and the quality of the evidence caught. I thought that was an interesting one. Are we more likely to get good evidence on a particular bedrock? And clay's on top again. So I think we'll go to a lot more clay-based locations in future, which is going to skew the data, but it's about catching the data points, I suppose, and that's the reason why we're doing it. Okay, now on to some very specifics. So one thing I picked up quite early on, even on the original Ugly box, was that when we looked at the graphs, which are presented by the investigation log, we literally pops up and it shows the data that time. We were seeing these sudden fluctuations in the air pressure just before and during the event that was recorded. And so that's interesting. And then I started checking back on previous ones, and I said, okay, I can see that pattern again. It was 7 micropascals of the fluctuation within about 3 seconds. And that kind of led me on to what I ended up doing, which was building specific devices to look for these patterns, because finding out in the review that something happened and these were the conditions is not very much use, but knowing at the time, that's the way to go. So I wanted to be able to then pick that up. I also build that into the team data loggers, so that flips over to a mode which says the air pressure has just fluctuated. Pay attention, because the thought behind this is it might not be a conscious change made by whoever might be there. It might just be their effect on the environment, or the environment's effect enables them to be present and change something. So it's the idea is that this pattern occurs, pay attention to something else. The pattern itself is not the important thing. The thing that's about to happen is the important thing. Looking at the types of variables, one I found not too long ago, a couple of years ago, was there was almost a solid bell curve on the moon phases. So these are the amount of events that occurred during each phase, and apart from a blip, an annoying blip on the first quarter, it's a real solid pattern that don't go investigating on a full moon for ghosts. Go for werewolves, but not ghosts. Because it'll be a quiet night. And now we kind of skew that because we try and avoid full moon investigations, because you're not going to get you're less chance than other things. And that's counterintuitive to popular culture or pagan beliefs that there's more power during the full moon. But I think that power is a power of growth and positivity, and I'm not sure if there's some sort of gravity effect there's every time we come up with something, we think, oh, that's interesting. We figured out something out. There's another 10 years worth of experimentation we need to do. Magnetic fields. I was very interested in this because there's a huge focus on EMF, and I thought I want to see if there's anything in the magnetic field component of that. There must be something linked there because the EMF is changing. Then maybe perhaps the source of the EMF isn't changing itself. And initially, I started then seeing the natural fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field, which you can see in some of these graphs. You can see then the field strength increasing one direction. But then occasionally, we'd see a sudden shift away from that, or sometimes a complete polarity shift, which is unusual and can't really be explained apart from a opposite polarity field suddenly being present and overwhelming the existing field and then disappearing again. But these were also tied to when people had clicked. And interestingly, in this one, only tended to be when there are investigators present. So if anyone on a static camera had seen something occurring and there was no one around, I've never seen yet a static camera piece of evidence or audio piece of evidence, which then occurs at the same time as a magnetic field change, which would indicate that people were a variable alongside the magnetic field anomalies. I then produced a device which then looked for those sudden changes or polarity shifts, just so we could fill a corridor with them. Leads on to the things that make. So I took the information we got in the air pressure and magnetic field, and also by analyzing when people had sudden temperature drops, what did that really look like in the data, and made devices which meant that we can then put them out during investigations and be aware of when these things were occurring and be careful to then look around, see if we've got anything else going on and draw attention to something might be happening. The temperature one's very useful when people are saying they feel cold to their left or their right. And an IR gun is good for measuring the floor or surfaces, but it doesn't measure the air around it. So that's why I needed an ambient one I can plop down and then either back up or disprove the feeling they're feeling based on what the air is actually doing around them. Those have gone very well. I've put lots of them out. We made 2,000 devices now. And the amount of feedback I get saying that this is working, that's working. That one of the conferences at last year, someone had picked up a aeroflux to detect the air pressure, and they went on investigation on the hotel rooms with the investigation team there. And afterwards came running back and said, that really works. That was amazing. It was going off at the same time we were in this tapping. And I thought, that's good. Because that's all part of the scientific method. We found some outputs from the experimentation and now sharing those with other people for them to then conduct the same experimentation without needing to look at all the data. So they can just, in the field, practically use these things. Over time, I kind of wanted to drill down into more about it and use more from it. So I took a technique at one point of lining a few of these up, say 5 in a row, and during calling out, say the leftmost one is yes. Next one is mostly yes. Next one is I don't know, mostly no and no. And then see if we can get some sort of scaled response back from who we're communicating with. And that works really well, because it means if you get a mostly no, you know your calling out is not quite on the mark, and you can then shift to something else. And if it's mostly yes, then you know you're getting close, but you're not there. And that refines the calling out. If you just get a yes no from something beeping or not, you will then just drop it. If you think you get no, you'll try something else. And that must be very frustrating, I always think, on the other side. If you're trying hard to communicate and someone just stops because they're not quite right. So based on those scales, I thought if it works to do a scale, why not link that scale to something a little bit more useful? So I took the concept of a lot of different word bank generators out there that have lots of different outputs based on finite environmental changes, but in no manner that I could tell, and let alone someone who was just interacting with it. So I took lots of different words based on several different questions they were using during calling out, and the strength of the responses given increased the emotion behind the word. So, how are you feeling? And the temperature change would indicate a small change would be I'm okay, I'm great, I'm excited, I'm ecstatic. And the bigger the change is, then the more powerful the word. And if I was interacting with that, I would be able to then, oh, I've got a word, I don't want that word, but I'm going to try something again and then get the right one. And that's where the empath came from, which was to try to produce these scaled responses based on the conditions that were being picked up on everything else. There's another couple there as well. I built a vibration sensor because I was interested whenever you get footsteps, are we actually looking at the floor moving or not? Or is it just the sound of it? And the Resonate generates an EMF field, which is really good for bringing as a gift, bringing us as a bit of energy to the environment, which seems to really be attractive because then that sets off bits of equipment near it. So there's some attraction to it, and I've been useful last 2 years of using that now. Okay, but back to the data loggers. What's the next step? So the spider is progressing because we've been using these prototypes for nearly a decade and we need to move on. And the way moving on is by introducing a low power Bluetooth network, which then can communicate to other pods, other remote sentinels, to then pull the different conditions, say around a room or several rooms, back to the main unit to then be able to monitor a bigger area, but also then use those sentinels as hotspots to communicate, say, to another data recorder in the building. So the spiders can then communicate through the different devices. So if you wanted to, you could set up a number of these devices around a building and then have that all fed back to one location to then work out where you need to go because you're getting lots of hits in one location or another. That information then is going to put in a public version of the paranormal investigation log. So it enables then individuals to upload their own data, do their own work on that location, pull off their own reports, etc. And my aim is to try and make that so people have the choice if they want to share that data or not. And then that shared data can be used by other people. So that then automatically enables you then to pull information about other people's investigations in the same location and what conditions were there. We can get a much bigger picture because the more data on this, the better. The more good points, the better. And finally, I've been in talks with quite a number of different locations across this country and another couple about putting a version of the spider as a permanent location recorder, which is then also automatically linked up to the investigation log. So we can then compare longer term changes in an environment and in types of locations with fixed short-term investigations, and also enable, say, a particular forge or a building, if they want to then give their guests and their investigators data about that night, they're able to go, here you go, you've got access to that. If you want to then take a look at those times, they can then use that as well to then back up some of the evidence and experiences they had, enabling them to then use the benefits of a data logger without needing to actually do it themselves. Sort of a passive way of picking up the data points and putting a bit of science behind their investigation. So that's the next 10 years worth of work all sorted for me. So that's nice. Okay, so that is largely it. We've covered pretty much everything where we are.
Andy, thank you very much. It's incredible hearing somebody advocate for data logging that actually mirrors ASSAP's own belief system. Logging data is incredibly important, and I don't need to keep lining it out for you guys. I've seen Andy's reports. Andy, I don't know, have you done the ASSAP training yet?
I haven't, no.
Well, we'll welcome you along to get your certification, but I don't think that you're going to be able to improve much on your data reports. They are incredible. He sent me a couple, obviously, for research that I'm doing. He's helped me out. So, yeah, very, very thorough. Looking at your data logging, I did have a link kind of to come into then handing you over to Kristian for the questions. And my link was talking about pressure, but you killed that conversation down. During
Sorry.
our investigation, no, because I've twisted it slightly, so just go with it. So during our investigations, the one thing that we found more than anything else, people say, oh, temperature drops and, it feels cold or it feels warm. We noticed pressure that we had every time that we had something in the house happen. And I'm not trying to distract away from you guys buying any equipment, because I advocate for Andy's equipment. But in the house, because we're really active quite a lot, we bought these bits of kit that they're static, and they're called Gove or Govey, and they sit in place and we don't touch them. They measure temperature, they measure pressure, lots of different aspects. Have a look at them online, and they run linking into an app on your phone, so that when you have an experience, for example, you hear something or something moves, then you can go and have a look. And it was corroborated that pressure would have a change. So having established that pressure is a very good measure marker for paranormal stuff, what surprised you on your data logging apart from pressure? What did you find that really surprised you with the evidence based that came back?
So actually, to stay on pressure briefly, the thing that surprised me is the air pressure fluctuating itself, because it shouldn't do that. It should be fairly constant. And in checking the air pressure fluctuation inside the building, not matching an air pressure fluctuation outside the building, what changes the air pressure that much? Because if physically something's got to change it, and there's not much that can change air pressure unless you're adding more air into a room, taking it away. Or the bit that I'm adding to the next generation of spider is gravity logging, because that would also affect the air pressure. So is there suddenly some change in gravity for a reason, which then is changing the air pressure suddenly? So it was the source of it which was interesting. But I think going back to the magnetic field one, the fact that magnetic field fluctuations do occur, but they have to have people there. That's a bit that I just don't understand. And I've spoken, when I go to a conference, I use that as a really good way of just throwing these I don't knows out there. And someone did say to me that it could be that the people who are there and their magnetic field is being used or utilized. Something is latching onto their own personal magnetic field, which is then that you're seeing. It's the fact that you've got someone there drawing this energy or adding to your energy or change. I don't know really, but again, that then means we've got to do a whole bunch more research on people's own fields. But
so are you saying that the magnetic field doesn't change if it's an empty building and you've left equipment in there static?
Yeah, I've not got a single recorded anomalous event which then is linked to a magnetic field on its own. So static recorder left in a corridor or a trap camera or something like that. Trap cam goes off, magnetic field doesn't change. The air pressure does. The air pressure does, whether people there or not. But the magnetic fields need people.
Mm.
I'm not sure if animals. I think I take some animals along. Maybe we can work out if it's a people thing or a living magnetic field thing.
Goes back to taking a bird in a cage down the mine kind of thing, doesn't it? For the simplest experiment of all. But,
great idea.
Yeah,
and also,
brilliant.
Give us a warning when you're going into the break room or not, if you really want to go in there.
Yeah. Just before I hand over to Kristian, I've just checked the full moon status for you coming to investigate at our house on Friday. Yeah. And it's a new moon on the same day.
Oh, perfect.
Bring it on.
I'll bring some extra SD cards just in case.
Excellent. Well, again, from me, Andy, thank you so much. It's been inspiring hearing this, and it's such a lot for people to listen and take in. Hopefully, it will explain a few things, encourage them to data log, get in contact with you, and, maybe we can help them with equipment or software or something.
Absolutely.
But thank you again from us here, from me anyway. But we're going to head over to the questions from the members now. So, Kristian.
Yes, there's certainly quite a few in this chat box here. You have ignited a debate and conversation, which is exactly what we're after.
Fantastic.
So, I mean, actually, the first question is my own. What do you think is the ultimate goal of logging data in paranormal investigations? What should it be? Is it about proving existence, understanding mechanisms, or something else?
Well, I think one thing I've learned from speaking to a lot of people is everyone is doing this for a different reason. Personally, my goal is prediction. I want to be able to say, tonight we're going to get this, this, and this because of this, this, and this reason, and we need to do this, this, and this will happen. And for me, that prediction is kind of the basis of a lot of when you have scientific breakthroughs, because you then understand the mechanics behind it. So maybe it's a little bit mechanics, but the result I want to see is be able to then more accurately predict when we can expect something.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So, how many hours do you dedicate to designing new kit?
Year, years is the right word. So things like that empath device I showed you, that took 3 years to put together, just because of structuring all that output in the right way and in a way that was possible to interact with. Took a lot of time, and something that draws that out is I never ever sell anything to someone that I don't use myself, and I've not used on dozens of investigations myself and found useful. I've got quite a back catalogue of things I've tried and didn't like and it didn't work, and they just stay in a cupboard, in the naughty cupboard.
Because I was going to say that surely leads into potentially I kind of I hate to use the word skeptical because I'm not using the right word there. For those who are cynical of your technology, they might be a bit like, well, he's creating this because he's trying to make a business out of this. He's selling it as a kit, and therefore you need pod 1, pod 2, pod 3, pod 4 to make sure you've got an accurate data set. Some people would say that is a bit of a paranormal economy in and of itself, that you are doing the Pokemon approach. You've got to collect them all. What would you say to that?
I would say I'm a research first guy. I'm investigator, research first, and the equipment's following along with that. So when I'm making something, it's usually to base that on something I want to try and do and share with other people. And pricing wise, there are people out there who are making things to sell and routinely get in touch with me because I'm making them look bad, because I don't charge more than cost for the things I make, because I want people to get out there and try it themselves. And I always bear that cost in mind. So things like the concept of the spider pods, if you want to use one thing, it will work. The more you want to put into an investigation, it will be there for you. That's my approach, that I try and help people with investigations, help them trying to do their own research. And sometimes that means buying a cheap bit of equipment, and sometimes it means that I need to build something for them. And even when I build things like bespoke pieces of equipment for people, it's still just a cost. I don't charge an absolute fortune because I spent some time on it, because I'm interested in what they're going to find as well. It might be useful.
Sure, I get that and understand that. So curiously, I mean, I was looking at your software database system that you're utilizing there and showed to everyone. Is that deployable on another server? Could a similar system be implemented by others should they want to replicate what you're doing, or would you recommend they enter your database?
That's they could, but what my main goal with just sharing that database system is the sharing aspect of it. I want to take